Hi guys, it's Princess Mia. I am back with part 2 of Mulan. I hope you guys are ready. Today we are going from chapters 6 to 11. So let's get started, shall we? Let's see. Where did I leave off? Where did I leave off? Oh, here we are. Chapter 6. Let's do this. Mulan paced on the hilltop in the faint light of dawn, practicing to be a man. Okay, Khan, she said to her horse. How about this? She cleared her throat and lowered her voice as deep as she could.
Excuse me, where do I sign in? Ha, I see you have a sword. I have one too.
She tried to draw it from the scabbard, but it got stuck and she dropped it. Khan whined in laughter till Mulan's shoe struck him in the head. Hey, I'm working on it, Mulan cried. It's not as easy as it looks. She looked down on the army camp below. Who am I fooling? It's going to take a miracle to get me into the army. Suddenly, a towering shadow rose on the rocks nearby. A throbbing voice wailed. Did I hear someone ask for a miracle? Let me hear you say, ow! Ah! Mulan screeched, a ghost! Get ready, Mulan, the voice boomed. Your serpentine salvation is at hand, for I have been sent by your ancestors to guide you through your masquerade, because if the army finds out you're a girl, the penalty is death. But strike fear from your heart, for I will protect you. Who are you, Mulan gasped. Who am I? I am your one and only guardian. I am the powerful, the pleasurable, the indestructible Mushu. Mulan waited in excited anticipation. Mushu jumped out from behind a rock. Mulan blinked in surprise. My ancestors sent me a little lizard to help me? Dragon! Mushu snapped. But you're intimidating? Mushu suggested. Awe-inspiring? Tiny, Mulan said. Of course, Mushu replied. Used to such put-downs. I'm a travel size for your convenience. Why, if I were my real size, your cow would die of fright. Insulted, Khan tried to bite the little dragon. Mulan glared at the horse. Dishonor on you, dishonor on your cow, dishonor on your whole family. Stop, Mulan pulled her horse away. I'm sorry, I've never done this before, and I could use all the help I can get. Then you're going to have to trust me, Mushu said. Okay? Mulan nodded. All right, let's get the show on the road, Mushu ordered. Cricky, get the bags. Soon they were all riding down the hill toward the army camp. Mushu slipped down the back of Mulan's armor so the other soldiers wouldn't see him. Mulan squealed. Quiet, you giving me away. Mushu instructed. Now act natural. Mulan climbed off Khan and led him into the camp. All around her, soldiers stared at her. Slowly, she pulled off her helmet. Would anyone be able to tell she was a girl? This is it, Mushu whispered from inside her collar. Time to show him your man walk. Shoulders back, chest high, feet apart. Now strut. Mulan tried to do all those things at once, but it only made her walk like a duck with a stomachache. I don't think they walk like this, she whispered. Believe me, Mushu whispered back. You'll blend in perfectly. Mulan glanced around at the men. They were a bunch of spitting, scratching, underbathed bunch. You're disgusting, Mulan whispered to Mushu. No, they're me. Mushu whispered back, and you're going to have to act just like them, so pay attention. Mulan watched as one recruit bragged to some others. This tattoo will protect me from harm. Oh, really? A recruit named Yao replied. Wham! He punched the first recruit in the chest. His companion Ling burst out laughing. Hope you can get your money back. I don't think I can do this, Mulan told her guardian. It's all about attitude. Mushu instructed. Be tough, like this guy here. Yao spit on the ground and glared at Mulan. What are you looking at? Punch him, Mushu whispered. It's how men say hello. Mulan swaggered up and smacked Yao in the back of the head. Whoa! Yao growled. I'm gonna hit you so hard it'll make your ancestors dizzy. But his friend Shampoo pulled him away. Yao shrugged but taunted over his shoulder. And you ain't worth my time, chicken boy. Chicken boy? Mushu popped out of Mulan's collar. You say that to my face, you limp noodle. Yao turned around, his eyes burning with rage. He grabbed Mulan and threw a punch, but Mulan ducked and the punch hit Ling. Shampoo tried to break up the fight, but wound up in the middle of it. As Mulan tried to sneak away, the fight shoved into a line of men waiting for food. Crash! They knocked over a huge cauldron of rice. Rice flew everywhere as the men picked themselves up from the mess and directed their anger at Mulan. Chief Fu, the Emperor's aide, made some notes on his tablet before striding into the general's tent. General Li rolled on to open his map of China. Beside him, a young officer named Shang listened closely. The Huns have struck here and here and here. The general said, I will take the troops up toward the Tongshan pass and stop Shen Yu before he destroys the village. Excellent strategy, sir, Chief Fu said. To Shang, the general added, you will stay and train the new recruits. When Chief Fu believes you are ready, you will join us, Captain. Shang's eyes grew wide in astonishment as the general handed him a beautiful sword. Captain? Chief Fu frowned at the general's surprising announcement. This is big responsibility. This is a big responsibility, General. Perhaps a soldier with more experience. Number 1 in his class, the general said. Extensive knowledge of training, techniques, and impressive military lineage, General Li said, smiled. I believe Li Shang will do an excellent job. Oh, I will, Shang said. I won't let you down. Very good, then the general picked up his helmet. We'll toast China's victory in the imperial city. To Chief Fu, he said, I expect a full report in 3 weeks. The 3 men walked outside where the fight among the recruits was still in full force. General Li climbed upon his horse. Good luck, Captain, and then he rode off with his men. Good luck, Father, Shang whispered under his breath. Chief Fu glowered in resentment. He was sure the young pup Shang would make a miserable mess of everything. Don't worry, General, he thought with a sneer. I'll be sure to report on everything. Now we're at chapter 7, guys. Almost to the point where the pictures are. Soldiers, Shang shouted. The fight stopped as the recruits stepped back, all pointing at Mulan. He started it. I don't need a troublemaker in my camp, Shang said sternly. What's your name, soldier? Name? Mulan hadn't planned a name. I got a name, she said nervously, and it's a boy's name, too. It's, Ping. Let me see your papers, Shang demanded. Mulan handed over her father's army papers. Shang's eyes widened in surprise. Fa Zhao, he asked. The Fa Zhao? Chief Fu studied the small, scrawny young soldier suspiciously. I didn't know Fa Zhao had a son. Mulan prayed he didn't remember their meeting in her village. He doesn't talk about me much, she explained. I can see why, Chief Fu whispered to Shang. Shang turned to his men. Thanks to your new friend Pin, you'll all spend tonight picking up every single grain of rice, and tomorrow the real work begins. All soldiers glared at Mulan. You know, Wushu whispered from Mulan's collar, I think you have to work on your people skills. All right, rise and shine, Sleeping Beauty, Wushu shouted the next morning at dawn. Mulan yawned and slowly sat up. Wushu stuffed a spoonful of porridge into her mouth. Now let's see your wolf face. Mulan tried to look fierce. Ooh, my bunny slippers just ran for cover. He scoffed. Come on, scare me, girl. Annoyed and sleepy, Mulan growled. All right, Mulan praised. Now get on out there and make me proud. Just then, Khan stuck his head into the tent and whined. What do you mean the troops just left? What? Hopping into her boots, Mulan rushed out of the tent. Mulan ran after her. Wait, you forgot your sword! When Mulan reached the training grounds, she heard Chief Fu shouting at the disorganized troops. Order, people, order! I like pan-fried noodles, said one soldier shouted. Mugu Gai Pei, another called out. Chief Fu fumed. That's not funny. As Mulan joined the group, the other soldiers began to tease her. Looks like Rice Boy slept in this morning, Ling smirked. Soldiers! Shang shouted as he approached the group. You will assemble swiftly and silently every morning. Ooh, tough guy, Yang said with a snicker. Shang drew his bow and fired an arrow high into a pole behind the men. Yeah, thanks for volunteering, he pointed at the pole. Retrieve the arrow. Grumbling, Ya bowed, then headed for the pole. One moment, Shang called out, you're missing something. He tied a disc to Yan's wrist with a colorful silk ribbon. This represents discipline. He tied a similar disc to Yao's other wrist. This represents strength. You need both to reach the arrow. With a determined scowl, Yao began to climb the pole, but the discs were too heavy and he fell to the ground. Chipo, Lin, and Mulan in turn tried to reach the arrow with the discs tied to their wrists. All failed. Did they send me daughters when I asked for sons? Shang complained. Somehow I'll make a man out of every single one of you. For the next few days, Mulan worked harder than she ever had. To defeat the Huns, Shang told them they must have the strength of a raging fire. Late one afternoon, Mulan, exhausted, collapsed on the ground. Shang walked over and handed her Khan's reins. You're not suited for war with the Huns. I'll never make a soldier of you. Pack up and go home. You're through. Mulan's heart sank, but as she turned to leave, she spotted Shang's arrow still stuck in the pole. If only she could recover that arrow, she would have succeeded in one thing. Determined to try once more, she tied the discs to her wrists and started to climb the pole, only to fail once more. Then she got an idea. She tied the 2 stone discs together, used them as a brace to pull herself up. The pole, Yao, Lin, Qin Po, and all the other soldiers stopped to watch her in admiration as she struggled to the top. When Mulan reached the arrow, she yanked it from the wood and held it aloft. Shang came out of his tent to see what all the commotion was about, and Mulan threw the arrow at his feet in triumph. The soldiers cheered. Even Shang seemed impressed. Mulan smiled. At last, she'd proved she belonged. Now we're at Chapter 8. One night, Mulan, Mushu, and Kriki listened by the tent as Shifu berated Shang. You think your troops are ready to fight? Ha! They won't last a minute against these Huns. They've completed their training, Shang protested. Those boys are no more fit to be soldiers than you are to be captain. Ha! I just wait till the general reads my report. Your troops will never see battle. Shifu turned away, but Shang grabbed him by the collar. We're not finished, he said angrily. Shifu glared at him as he removed Shang's hand. Be careful, Captain. The general may be your father, but I'm the Emperor's counsel. And by the way, I got that job on my own. You're dismissed, Shifu said with a sarcastic smirk. Shang stormed out of the tent, disgusted. Outside in the darkness, Mulan called out to Shang. For what it's worth, I think you're a great captain. Shang turned briefly, then hurried off. I saw that, Mushu scolded. You like him, don't you? No, Mulan exclaimed. Uh-huh. Mushu rolled his eyes. Didn't they have enough to worry about without a complication like that? He jammed his fists on his hips. Go to your tent. The Mushu sat down to think. Shifu's interference with the recruits' training was a problem. He needed to get Mulan into the action soon. Otherwise, she'd never be a hero. Come on, Kriki, he said. It's time we took the war into our own hands. Together, they sneaked into Shifu's tent with Mushu directing. Kriki wrote a note and signed it General Li. A short while later, Shifu burst into Shang's tent. Captain, urgent news from the general. He held up the fake note that Kriki had written. We're needed at the front. Outside, Mushu grinned at Kriki. Pack your bags, Kriki. We're taking this show on the road. As soon as they could break camp, Shang led his troops through the forest. They sang as they hiked into the mountains, still covered with the last of snows of spring. Suddenly, the men stopped singing. Off in the distance, they saw black smoke curling into the sky. Slowly, carefully, they made their way to the village, or what was left of it. The village was in ruins, nearly burned to the ground. Search for survivors, Shang said solemnly, but there were none. Mulan walked slowly through the village. Growing up, she'd heard frightening tales of horrible Huns. Today, as she walked to the village, she saw those stories were true. Just then, something on the ground caught her eye. She bent and picked it up. It was a child's doll. Shang jumped from his horse and came towards her, his eyes filled with disbelief. I don't understand, he said. My father should have been here. Then they joined Shifu on the bluff and looked down onto what was left of the battlefield. Shields, swords, and flags littered the snowy ground. His father had been here. After all, his army had fought the Huns and lost. Chi Po came forward carrying something, a helmet. The general, he said sadly. Shang slowly took his father's helmet and then turned away. As the top of the bluff, he planted his sword into the snow. He placed his father's helmet on top and then kneeling bowed his head. I'm sorry, Mulan whispered after a moment of silence. He pulled himself together, curtly nodded at Mulan, and quickly mounted his horse. The Huns are moving quickly, he called to his men. His face was hard and cold as he pointed to the mountains. We'll make better time to the Imperial City through the Tongshao Pass. We're the only hope for the Emperor now. Move out. Mulan laid the doll beside the generals. And now, we have the pictures. We have some very good pictures from the first day. There's some really good pictures in here. And some of these pictures are from later in the book. but then she joined the others in the war that was suddenly all too real. Mary and cool Mulan and her fellow soldiers marched through the mountain pass. Khan pulled the munitions wagon with Mushu and Kriki perched inside. Thunk! An arrow struck Shang's armor and knocked him to the ground. Mulan and the other soldiers looked up in surprise. Huns, hundreds of them from the mountain, a downpour of flaming arrows rained on them. A flaming arrow hit the munitions wagon Mulan cut Khan free seconds before. The ammunition exploded. Mulan caught Mushu and took cover with the rest of the soldiers behind an outcropping of rocks. Their cannons roared hurriedly. The men started to unload their ammunition. Then the mountain fell silent. Mulan watched hopefully as the last wisps of smoke cleared. Had they defeated the Huns? Then a Hun horseman appeared, Shang Yu, followed by a line of soldiers that stretched as far as the eye could see. Shang turned to his men. Prepare to fight. If we die with honor. Yao aimed the last cannon at Shang Yu. Mulan drew her sword, but in the blade she saw the reflection of the mountain, and an idea formed in her head. Shink! She sheathed her sword and grabbed the last cannon. She carried it out from behind the defensive line toward Shang Yu, who was galloping toward her, his horse. Ping! Shang called after a soldier. Come back! But Mulan ignored him. With trembling hands, she pulled out the flint to light the cannon and fire the last shot. Slam! Shang Yu's falcon struck, knocking the flint into the snow. Mulan struggled to her knees and grabbed Mushu and yanked his tail. Whoosh! A flame shot out of the tiny dragon's mouth and lit the cannon's fuse, but the shot went way over Shang Yu's shoulders. How could you miss? Mushu shrieked. How was it 3 feet in front of you? But Mulan had missed on purpose. The rocket exploded on the mountaintop, and the rocks crumbled into a snowy avalanche that tumbled down in the mountain. Shang Yu saw what Mulan had done and slashed at her with his sword, but she dodged him as the avalanche buried Shang Yu in his sword. Mulan tried to get away, but the last wave of snow piled into her, and Khan used his powerful hooves as leverage. Khan dug his way out of the mountains of snow with Mulan clinging to his back. She searched the battlefield for Shang. At last she found his half-buried body, half buried in snow. Using all her strength, she dragged his limp body onto her horse, safely back with his troops. Shang looked at Mulan. Ping, you're the craziest man I've ever met. For that I owe you my life. From now on, you have my trust. Mulan smiled delightedly by her captain's praise. Let's hear it for Ping, Ling shouted. The bravest of us all. All the soldiers cheered, but instead of pride, Mulan suddenly felt the world spin. The last words she heard before blackening out were Shang's. He's wounded, get help! Shang and his men waited anxiously outside the medic's tent. At last the medic came out with a look of concern on his face. He whispered in Shang's ear. Shang was stunned by the medic's shocking news, and then he frowned and strode into the tent. Inside, Mulan woke and smiled up into her captain's face, but his expression was hard and cold. Mulan gasped and touched her chest, which was covered in bandages. In treating her wound, the doctor discovered her secret. I can explain, she began, but then Shifu burst in the tent. So it's true, he cried disgusted. I knew there was something wrong with you. Roughly, he dragged her from the tent and announced to all the soldiers. She's a woman! A treacherous swine! He threw her to the ground. The soldiers gaped at her in disbelief. Mulan looked at her up into the startling faces of her friends, Yang, Ling, and Qingpo. My name is Mulan, she said quietly. Her eyes turned to Shang, begging him to understand. I did it to save my father. High treason, Shifu nearly shrieked. Ultimate dishonor. He glared at the captain, challenging him to take action. Shang gazed down at Mulan lying defenseless on the ground. Here was a good soldier whose quick thinking and bravery had defeated the Huns who had saved Shang's life. Here was also a soldier who had lied to him, lied to them all, who had broken the law. Slowly Shang walked to Khan and removed Mulan's sword as he strode back toward Mulan. Her friends Yang, Ling, and Chipo stepped forward to protect her. Chifu's eyes dared them to interfere. You know the law. Mulan trembled. She too knew what her punishment must be. Shan raised the sword, and the law said Mulan must die. Chapter 9. Thunk! Shang threw the sword deep into the snow, inches in front of Mulan. A life for a life, Shang said coldly. My debt is repaid. Without another word, he mounted his horse, then called to his troops. Move out! Chifu could not believe his eyes. But you can't just... I said, move out, Shan repeated. Later that afternoon, Mulan, Mushu, and Kriki huddled by a small campfire. I should never have left home, Mulan muttered. Hey, come on, Mushu said, trying to make her feel better. You went out and saved your father's life. Who knew you'd end up disgracing your ancestors and losing all your friends? Maybe I didn't do it for my father, Mulan said. Maybe what I really wanted was to prove I could do things right. So when I looked in the mirror, I see someone worthwhile. Mulan stared at her reflection in her helmet and sadly shook her head. But I was wrong. I see nothing. Blinking back tears, she let the helmet tumble to the ground. Touched by her sadness, Mushu picked up the helmet and spit on it and then gave it a vigorous rub. Well, that's just 'cause it needs a little spit, that's all. Let me shine this up for you. Here, look at you. You look so pretty. But Mulan couldn't even look. I'm sorry I wasted your time, Mushu. I know you tried. Then Mushu looked at his own pitiful reflection, and he knew he had to confess. Look, the truth is, we're both frauds. Fakes, he admitted. The ancestors never sent me. They don't even like me. You risked your life to help people you love. I risked my life to help myself. At least you had good intentions. Cricky chirped sadly. What do you mean you're not lucky? Mushu exclaimed. You lied to me? He shook his head and glared at Khan. So what are you? He asked the horse. A sheep? I'll have to face my father sooner or later, Mulan said at last. Let's go home. Mushu sighed. Yep, this ain't gonna be pretty, but don't worry, okay? We started this together and that's how we're gonna finish it. I promise. And then the feisty little dragon did something surprising. He gave Mulan a hug. Together they packed up their few belongings. Suddenly they heard a blood-curdling howl from down below Mulan. Mushu and Cricky crept to the edge of the canyon and looked down at the battlefield. Shang Yu! He was alive! And they watched in horror as a handful of his men dug themselves out from under the snow. Mushu whistled. Oh no! From your freezer to your front door in minutes! The Huns turned toward the distant lights of the Imperial City, home of the Emperor, where Shang was headed. Mulan grabbed up her sword and leaped onto Khan's back. Mushu followed him. He was eager to get away from the Huns too, only she was going the wrong way. He called to Mulan, home is that way. I have to do something, Mulan insisted. And she headed towards the Imperial City. Cricky made a face at Mulan and followed Mulan. Mushu rolled his eyes. The girl was determined, but what could he do? He promised to stick with her. Yee-haw! He cried enthusiastically and hurried after her. Dusk enveloped the Imperial City. At this time of night, Mulan's village back home would be dark and deserted, but in the Imperial City, lights flickered everywhere and crowds of people still filled the streets. Everyone was celebrating the victory over the Huns. Mulan rode up on her horse, frantically searching the crowd. Then she heard an official shouting across the crowd, Make your way for the heroes of China! Shang rode by on his horse, followed by Yang, Lin, Xin Pao, and the rest of the men. Shang, Mulan called out. Shang and her friends stared at her in surprise. The Huns are alive, she called. They're in the city. What? Shang shook his head in disbelief, his eyes hard and cold. You don't belong here, Mulan. Go home. But Shang, Mulan cried, I saw them in the mountains. I wouldn't lie about it. Why should I believe you? He replied. Why else would I come back? She argued. You said you trust Ping. Why is Mulan any different? Shang had no answer for that. Mulan warned her soldier friends. Keep your eyes open. I know they're here. With the last shout of Yeehaw, she galloped off and was lost in the crowd. At the end of the broad boulevard, a palace drums pounded, fireworks exploded in the dark sky, and the Emperor came out to greet Shang and his soldiers. Down on the street, Mulan had jumped off Khan and now searching the crowd for someone who would believe her. Sir, the Emperor is in danger. The man pushed her away and turned his back. If the Huns are here, she said, another man, you have to help. Frustrated, Mulan turned to Mushu. They won't listen. You're a girl again, Mushu said with a shrug. What do you expect? Then she saw Shang climb to the platform to present the Emperor with Shang Yu's sword. My children, the Emperor called to his people, heaven smiles down upon the kingdom. China will sleep safely tonight. Thanks to our brave warriors, the Huns have been defeated. The crowd cheered, holding Shang Yu's sword in front of him. Shang knelt before the Emperor. I know what this means to you, Captain Li. The Emperor said gently, your father would have been proud. But as Shang held out Shang Yu's sword, a falcon swooped down from the sky and grabbed it. It soared to the palace rooftop and dropped it into the hands of a statue. No, not a statue. Shang Yu, the Han leader, shook his sword over his head in an arrogant cry of victory. Shang Yu's men cut their way out of a parade dragon on the palace steps before the eyes of the stunned crowd. They knocked Shang down and grabbed the Emperor and dragged him inside the palace. By the time Shang and his men could react, the Huns had slammed and locked the palace door. Quickly, Mulan's soldier friends knocked over a stone statue and began to use it all as a battering ram. Mulan shook her head. They'll never get you in that way. She ran over and whistled. Hey guys, I got an idea. Jianpo, Lin, and Yao didn't think twice. They ran to Mulan's side, but Shang held back. Even now, it was still hard for him to trust this young woman who had deceived him. Mulan couldn't wait for him to make up his mind about her. If they were going to save the Emperor, they had to act now. Mulan prepared the soldiers for battle, but she did it in a clever way. Makeup, bracelets, wigs, and dresses. She dressed them up like women. Mulan knew the Huns would be watching for soldiers. She figured they wouldn't pay much attention to women inside the palace. Then she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned around and it was Shang. Mulan smiled. They could face anything now. Quickly, Shang, Ling, and Po used their sashes to climb the columns just as she climbed the pole to fetch Shang's arrow during training. Shang followed using his cape. Once inside, they slipped along the halls. "We're almost there," Mulan said. "Any questions?" "Yeah," Yao said. "Does this dress make me look fat?" Chapter 10. On the palace balcony, Shang Yu sneered at the Emperor. "How disappointing," he drawled. "These people fear you." The Emperor replied with dignity. "They respect me." Shan Yu clicked his tongue. "Fools, now that we have their attention. Bow down." Shang Yu raised a gleaming sword above the Emperor. "I'll make this quick." The Emperor did not move. "Your walls have fallen," Shang Yu cried angrily. So have you. Bow to me." But the Emperor would not bend. No matter how the wind howls, a mountain cannot bow to it. Shang Yu's face turned red with rage. "Then you will kneel in pieces." He raised his sword, but as he brought it down, clang! Shang blocked the blow with his own. As he wrestled the Hun to the ground, Mulan and her friends ran onto the balcony, and Mulan threw a piece of cloth over a banner hanging from a pillar. Jianpo scooped up the Emperor in his arms. "Oh, sorry, Your Majesty," he whispered. Then he used the banner as a zip line and slid the Emperor safely down to the ground. Lin Yao quickly followed. "No!" With a cry of rage, Shang Yu shook Shang off, knocking him unconscious. He ran to the edge of the balcony and saw that the Emperor had escaped safely to the ground. Shang Yu let out a roar of frustration. Then he grabbed the groggy Shang and held his sword to Shang's throat. "You took away my victory." Suddenly, thunk, something soft hit the Hun in the back of his head. He whirled around. Mulan had thrown her shoe at him. "No, I did." Shang Yu stared in recognition. "You're the soldier from the mountains." He grabbed up his sword and began to chase her. Mulan ran. She ran out onto the roof just as Shang Yu caught up with her. She looked around for a weapon, but only could find her fan. With a snap of her wrist, she opened the fan and gazed over it at the Hun. Shang Yu threw back his head and laughed. "Looks like you're out of ideas." He stabbed his sword through the painted silk of her fan. "Not quite," she answered. She snapped the fan closed on the blade and then twisted his sword from his hand. "Ready, Mushu?" she hollered. Shang Yu whirled around. Mushu rode on a black kite. When he ripped off the wings, they could see he had a rocket strapped to his back. "Ready, baby," Mushu shouted with glee. With a quick blast of fire from his mouth, he lit a small stick and handed it to Cricket. "Light me." The little Cricket lit the rocket's fuse, and the rocket took off toward Mulan and Shang Yu. Mulan stabbed the sword through Shang Yu's tunic, pinning him to the roof. Then she vaulted out of the way. The rocket smashed into Shang Yu, clung to the sword as the rocket carried Shang Yu on the roof toward the fireworks tower. Grabbing Mushu and Cricket, Mulan broke into a run. "Get off the roof! Get off the roof!" she shouted. As Shang Yu and the rocket slammed into the fireworks tower, a towering, massive fireball erupted. Shang staggered out of the palace just as it blew up behind him. He looked back over his shoulder as building fragments rained down around him. Now at chapter 11, the last chapter. Still a couple pages together. Fireworks showered the night sky as the palace blew up. Seconds later, Mulan flew through the air and landed on Shang, knocking him down the palace steps. Mulan hugged him in relief. Seconds later, Shang Yu's sword fell at their feet with a clang. And then Mushu and Cricket dropped from the sky. Shang smiled as he saw Yao, Lin, and Jianpo emerge unharmed. And then Shifu stumbled from the wreckage, his hat smoldering. "Where is she?" he shrieked. "Now she's done it. What a mess!" And then he saw her, that disgraced, deceitful female. In a rage, he stumbled towards her. Mulan's friends formed a circle around her. "Stand aside," Shifu shouted. "That creature's not worth protecting." "She's a hero," Shang protested. "She's a woman," Chief spluttered. "She'll never be worth anything." Shang grabbed him by the neck of his tunic. "Listen, you pompous—" "That," said a stern voice, "is enough." Everyone turned. "The Emperor." "Your Majesty," Shang said with a bow, "I can explain. But the Emperor held up his hand and waved the men aside as his eyes fell upon Mulan. Nervously, she bowed her head. I've heard a great deal about you, Fa Mulan, he said sternly. You stole your father's armor, you ran away from home, pretended to be a soldier, lied to your commanding officer, dishonored the Chinese army, destroyed my palace. Mulan lowered her eyes, trembling in fear. And, the Emperor said more gently, you have saved us all. Mulan looked up in surprise, and the Emperor was smiling at her. Then he did something that emperors do not do. He bowed to her. Mulan watched in astonishment as everyone in the plaza followed his example. Just a few days earlier, she had been labeled by the matchmaker as one who would never bring honor to her family, and now the entire city had bowed her in her honor. Chifu, the Emperor called. Chifu stepped forward. Yes, Your Excellency? See that this woman is made a member of my council. Chifu nearly choked. A member? What? Impossible, he thought to himself. Unheard of. There are no council positions open, Your Majesty. That should take care of that. Very well, the Emperor said. He turned to Mulan. Then you can have his job. Chifu fainted. Mulan gazed into the eyes of the Emperor. No woman in the history of China had ever served on the Emperor's council, but she knew where she longed to be. With all due respect, Your Excellency, I think I've been away from home long enough. The Emperor smiled as if he understood. Then take this, he said. He removed the royal crest that hung around his neck and slipped it on her head. So your family will know what you have done for me. And this, the Emperor gave her Shang Yu's sword, so the world will know what you have done for China. Mulan accepted the gifts reverently, and then, unable to stop herself, she threw her arms around the Emperor's neck. Is she allowed to do that? Mulan whispered to Ling. Perhaps it was not the most dignified thing to do, but it was the only way to express the joy in her heart. The Emperor looked presently surprised, and then Qin Po gathered up Mulan, Yao, and Ling in his arms, and they shared a group embrace. Mulan shyly turned to Shang. They looked at each other in an awkward silence. Shang struggled with the words. At last he simply said, You fight good, and he shook her hand. Oh, Mulan said, trying to hide her disappointment, but what else had she expected of him to say? Thank you. Then she climbed onto her horse with Mushu and Kriki. Come, let's go home. Shang watched her ride off, wanting something to stop her. Beside him, the Emperor cleared his throat. The flower that blooms in adversity is the most rare and beautiful of all. Sir? Shang asked, a puzzled look on his face. The Emperor shook his head. He tried again. You don't meet a girl like that every dynasty. As Shang gazed into the distance thoughtfully, the Emperor remembered what he had said to his court not so long ago. A single grain of rice can tip the scale. One man may be the difference between victory and defeat. How true, he thought with a smile, or a one very special young woman. The morning stars were fading into the blush of sunrise. As Mulan reached home at last, she smiled when she saw her father already up sitting beneath a tree. A soft breeze blew through the garden, and a blossom from the tree floated into Fa Zhao's lap. He picked it up and gazed at it tenderly. Then he looked up to see his daughter. She was home. But before he could rise to his feet, Mulan knelt before him. She laid a sword in his lap. I brought you the sword of Shang Yu, she said, and the crest of the Emperor. They're gifts to honor the Fa family. Fa Zhao accepted the gifts solemnly, but he immediately sent them aside and gathered Mulan in his arms. The greatest gift in honor, he said with tears of joy in his eyes, is having you for a daughter. I've missed you so. I've missed you too, Baba. At last she had brought honor to her family, and best of all, she'd done it her own way. Isn't it wonderful? Fa Li said, watching from the house. Grandma Fa shrugged. She brings home a sword. If you ask me, she should have brought home a man. Excuse me. Mulan's mother and grandmother turned to find a handsome young man waiting nervously at the gate. Does Fa Mulan live here? Mother and grandmother exchanged a look, then hurried to the garden. Shang hurried toward the garden. Honorable Fa Zhao, he began with a deep bow. Then he saw Mulan. Mulan, he stammered. You forgot your helmet. He continued, turning to Fa Zhao. Actually, your helmet that she stole. Mulan and her father looked at each other. Then Fa Zhao motioned to Shang, stepping away to let the two talk. Besides, it would be a shame to lose a good helmet. Shang was still having trouble saying what he meant. Mulan laughed. Would you like to stay for dinner? Would you like to stay forever? Grandma Fa called out. Well, come on, Mulan said. Mushu said to the first ancestor as they watched from the temple. Who did a good job? Oh, all right, the first ancestor admitted, crossing his arms. Then he muttered under his breath, You can be guardian again. You can be a guardian again. Mushu gasped, What? The first ancestor threw up his hands. I said, he repeated irritably, you can be guardian again. What? Wishes squealed. Creaky banged the gong again and woke up the other ancestors. All night long they celebrated their good fortune. Generation after generation would tell of Mulan's courage and devotion, and her story would bring honor to herself and her family forever. And that is the end of the story, guys. Thank you guys for listening and watching, and I hope you enjoyed Mulan, and the next book will be Cinderella tomorrow. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please subscribe and like this video, and I hope you guys have a wonderful night or day or whatever, whenever you're watching this, and thank you for watching. Bye, everybody!